We'll move on to our next speaker, who is Arnold August. Arnold is a Montreal-based journalist and the author of 3 books on Cuba, The Groundbreaking Democracy in Cuba and the 1997-98 elections, also Cuba and Its Neighbours, Democracy in Motion, and most recently, Cuba-US Relations, Obama and Beyond. He is also a journalist. He is published in English, Spanish, and French in North and South America, Europe, the Middle East, and India. He was also an activist in Montreal in 1970, where he was targeted by the War Measures Act. So with all that said, Arnold, please take it away.
Thank you very much, Brandon. Just like to mention that 2 of the books that you mentioned have been published by Fernwood Publishing. So this is a shout out to my publisher, Errol Sharp, who is with us today. I'm going to concentrate, I'd like to concentrate on two movements, different movements. One, the Ottawa Convoy, and secondly, a long time ago, what we can call the FLQ, or Nationalist Movement, between 1963 and 1970. What do they have in common? I would say that everyone can agree, have different points of view on both of these, Ottawa and Quebec 1970, but I think everyone would agree that they are both non-conventional types of movements, looking at from the point of view of the left or the trade union movement. So before going on to Quebec, I would like to provide, when I saw those images in Ottawa, the Canadian flag, etc., descending on Ottawa, I had pretty much the same feeling as Nian. What is it? Is this coming a colonialist offensive against the First Nations, against Quebec? Now, what I did, I noticed 2 things in Ottawa, the Ottawa protest movement. One was they were singing the national anthem, right? What are the words of national anthem? Our home and native land, strong and free. The true North, strong and free. So I didn't want to be accused of being anti-working class or anti-trade unions. So I asked a colleague of mine, a friend, Don Foreman, who is in the Secretariat of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. So I asked him, look, in your union demonstrations, whether it's Cup W or others, picket lines, demonstration, do you ever sing the national anthem? He said, no. He's a man of very few words. No. The other thing I noticed about Ottawa was the Canadian flag all over the place. This was dealt with by the previous speaker. So once again, this raised my eyebrow. What is why so many Canadian flags? And so I asked my colleague once again, Don Foreman, in any of your trade union activities, protests, do you ever have the Canadian flag? He said, never. We only have the trade union flags. So for me, it might be a visual effect, but I think it buttresses the view that many of us here are saying that it was not a working class, it was not a working class movement, even though myself and we cannot whitewash everyone there as not being part of the working class, because some of the demands, of course, were legitimate. So now let's move towards Quebec, but in order to go into Quebec, one has to give some background information because Quebec, 1960s, it was suppressed by the War Measures Act. The War Measures Act was established in 1914 against so-called the possibility of insurgency, but there were 89 left-wing newspapers that were suppressed. In 1917, the use of the War Measures Act increased substantially. Guess why? 1917 was the year of the Bolshevik Revolution. So the state used that measure in order to further suppress left-wing organization, left publications. And then with World War II, they also increased it by completely outlawing the Communist Party of Canada and progressive newspapers. Of course, they mixed it in. They also outlawed fascist organizations in World War II, but the overall lasting effect is their opposition to the left alternative within Canada. Now, we go to move to Quebec, where I'm in now. The FLQ was established in 1963. Front de Libération du Québec, 1963. Now, where did they get their inspiration from? Was it, right-wing movement or whatever? No, they got their inspiration from the struggle in Algeria against French occupation and for a new Algeria. They got this is what they are saying. I mean, it's public. They got their inspiration from Cuba, the Cuban Revolution. And all of their pamphlets, writings in those times, since it was established, 1963, leading up to 1970, there's a very clear indication against capitalism and against colonialism, and seeing Quebec as part of the worldwide struggle against colonialism and imperialism. Now, some of the people in this organization, for example, I give you one example, Marc Carbonneau, who was one of the leaders of the FLQ when it started its terrorist activity. He was the leader of the Taxi Association in Quebec, who carried out a very valiant struggle against a Canadian transport monopoly, which wanted to undermine the well-being and the working conditions and income of the taxi drivers. And there was I can give you one other example of the people who were a leading force in the 1960s, the FLQ, and that is Jacques Langteau, okay? So I just have to fast forward rapidly. What happened was that in Quebec, 63, 70, there was a lot of terrorist activities, bombings taking place. Allow me to make this very clear. I was active then. I did not support terrorist activities. And in hindsight, I still do not support these type of terrorist activities. But what happened? The FLQ kidnapped Richard Cross, was the British consul in Montreal, as a symbol of their opposition to British colonialism over Quebec. And they kidnapped Pierre Laporte, who was at that time the Minister of Labor in the Quebec government, I guess as that their way of saying, supporting the workers against the anti-working class activities of the Quebec government. Now, things came to a head. They issued a manifesto. Their main goal at that time was to liberate what they call the political prisoners. There were 20 political prisoners in Quebec penitentiaries at that time, to liberate them. And that is why they did carry out these two kidnappings and made the demand for the liberation of their political prisoners. They did not get it. However, the Canadian government eventually worked out a deal with them that if Robert Laporte was assassinated, James Cross was still in their hands. If they would liberate James Cross, they would give them a free trip to Cuba without any charges against them, and they did go to Cuba. Now, just as a footnote to that, to show the positive nature of that movement, even though I do not support terrorism, but one of the people involved in that was sent to Cuba. He had a lot of free time in his hands. So what he did, he got a job in Cuba, translating for the main Cuban newspaper speeches by Fidel Castro and other from Spanish into French. And there are other examples of this as well. So what happened in 1970? The War Measures Act was enacted by the Trudeau government. There was immediately over 500 people who were arrested overnight. I knew that I was amongst the activists on that list. And so myself and others, we changed addresses. So I got away with it. But when I returned to my house a few months later, when the dust settled, I saw that they had broken into my apartment. I padlocked it. Now, what happened in 1970, while all this was going on, and just before Trudeau enacted the War Measures Act by occupying Quebec with the Canadian Army, there was an outpouring of sympathy amongst the people throughout Quebec when the manifesto of the FLQ was read over the airwaves. They sort of forced it upon the airwaves and newspapers to publicize. So I participated in some of them, even though I did not support the terrorist act. One has to say that the activities there had a large amount of support amongst the population because of what? Opposition to colonialism and opposition to capitalism, and in support of the rights of the workers. Now, this was an important movement, and a lot of us were arrested, and it was an important feature of what was happening in Quebec at the time. And now, since then, the War Measure Act was established. Now, one can ask, some of you have already dealt with it, and that is, was the War Measure Act necessary in 1970? Was the Justin Trudeau's invoking the Emergency Act against the truckers last month? I don't think either of them were justified. Just allow me to connect the dots there. So you have two movements. Now, the reason I raised the Quebec non-conventional movement to compare it to the Ottawa movement, it's day and night. Aside from the terrorist activities, which no one can agree with, one was definitely on the left, anti-colonial, pro-worker, while the other one had nothing to do with it. I just mentioned how some of the FLQ people involved in that have since come around, like Jacques Langteau, one of the leaders then. When he came back to Canada, he started to write for Journal de Montréal, which is one of the most important newspapers in Quebec. He has a regular column there, in which he, writing from Cuba, in which he clears away all the disinformation with regards to Quebec through that media. Now, there are many other examples of those who have come out of that and doing positive things in life. But I would like to see one of the leaders of the Ottawa occupation. What will they be doing later on in life? I doubt if they will be doing anything positive, anything pro-working class, whatever. So the question is now, in Ottawa, it definitely was not necessary. Why did Trudeau wait so long? Well, I've been watching Justin Trudeau for quite some time now. He used the same tactics as he used during the close Canada down, just before the pandemic hit us. Now, he waited, and the blockades were all over Canada. Why didn't he act right away? He waited and waited, trying to find the appropriate moment when people would get fed up and carry out racist remarks against the First Nations, which started to happen. In fact, his death took place. We started to have a movement, we saw it through the media, against the First Nations. But of course, he was saved by the pandemic, and the roadblocks had to go down, not as a result of Trudeau, but as a result of the pandemic. Now, in the same way in Ottawa, in my view, why did he wait so long? He waited so long for the very same reason. He knew that people were getting fed up, especially in the Ottawa region. He was waiting for the appropriate time that public opinion would increase, which would give him the moral background, if you like, to invoke the Measures Act, which of course he did. But in any case, it was not necessary. But like the War Measures Act, the 1914, 1917, World War II, these special acts, even though they have two different names, the War Measure Act is less stringent than the Emergency Act. The War Measures Act, the government did not need the okay from the Parliament. They could do it on their own, while the more recent updated Emergency Act, they have to get approval from the Parliament. But in any case, they didn't even use that act. But we know for a fact that as a result of that, the examples were given, what is happening to the First Nations and British Columbia, the effect of that act is not going to be against the trade unions. It's not against these fascists, but rather against progressive trade unions. And
30 seconds, Arnold.
How much?
30 seconds.
Okay. So just to close this off, that we have to be clear that we cannot have any faith in the Trudeaus, in the Canadian government, that these acts at the end of the line, they are used to suppress the left alternative and also the trade union movement and First Nations. Thank you.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on the screen.